Coming up next on Get Caught in Annette.
You are now tuned in to Mind, Body, and Soul with Annette, where your host, Annette Harris, analyze intriguing life questions and concerns, such as, do Christians suffer from mental illness? Have you wondered why they act abnormal? Or you may ask, what is really going on in their minds? Do you need Annette? Well, keep listening for a biblical understanding of the psychology of the mind.
Hey, great evening, guys. Great evening. Welcome to another wonderful segment of Mind, Body, and Soul with Annette. I'm your host, your girl, Annette Harris. I am the CEO of Getcaughtin Annette Incorporated. I am also your certified mental health ambassador and two-time award-winning author of that bestseller, Surviving a Silenced Heartbeat. Listen, I want you guys to come in. Don't readjust your cameras because you're used to seeing me on a Wednesday afternoon at 12 noon. But as you've seen the promos, we are doing something special here for the month of October. October has so many different awareness months, meanings, should I say, but we want to focus on mental health. We want to focus on being well. And I am so grateful that my good friend, Dr. Stevens, reached out to me to organize this wonderful platform so that we could have this discussion. So before I bring them in, I want to encourage each of you to make sure that you share, like, love, care button, throw it up. You can actually engage and tag individuals directly into this live feed so that if they are not able to watch it live while we're on, they can always go back and watch the replay. So we don't want anyone to miss out on anything. We have a wonderful panel that I am so excited to engage with on this evening. I tell people, when you talk about mental health, when you talk about psychology, mental health, I feel like a kid in a candy store because that's my background. That's what I, love to try and push and promote. So let me bring them in one by one. I do have Dr. Stevens. I'm going to bring her on first because she is the one that kind of catapulted everything and placed everything together. And she's looking beautiful as usual on this evening. So we're going to bring her in. And then also author Blaque Diamond is here with us on this evening, and it is so good to see you. I tell you, you're still in my prayers. And then we also have a new friend that I met on this evening, Yolanda Neals Kindred. We have, and she is here with us on this evening to bring, attention to this particular subject of discussion. Also, author Bobbie Strutchen is here with us on this evening. It's okay. It's all good. Author Bobbie, it's all good. We have her here. And then, of course, to round out this panel on this evening is leadership coach Rachel L. Gary. Everybody is in the house on this evening. I'm excited. How are you ladies doing?
Wonderful.
Good.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Yes, it is so good to see each of you. I've had some of you on before as we were highlighting your nominations through the Distinguished Author Guild Award. And let's see. Okay, I was going to say I thought I had somebody else on as a separate guest, but through the Distinguished Author Guild Award is when we had the interviews on last month. So I want to jump right in here. I'm so excited. I really am. When you talk about mental health, I am not just saying that it excites me. Trust me, it really excites me. It really does. Because because of the simple fact that we don't really talk about it like we should. Although the tide is changing, I will say that much. The tide is changing, and different ones are becoming more and more open. We see it in entertainment, right? We see it in the sports industry, right? And so different ones are making sure that we understand and know what it is we're dealing with mentally. And a lot of stuff is connected to it. We just don't realize it. So I want to jump right in, and I want to ask, I want us to have this conversation because I'm a part of this panel too, about the difference between mental health and mental illness. I want to, get your thoughts. I think we should or could start there, before we start talking about some of the other topics that are of importance. But maybe starting there, talking about the difference between mental health and mental illness. Of course, I have, some notes here, but I don't know, Dr. Stevens, or one of you want to start with that, what your thoughts are on the difference?
Well, sure. I'll be happy to start. Um, first, I want to say thank you so much, Annette, for having us on your platform. We are so grateful, and I'm thankful for all of the beautiful panelists who I know all of them personally. So I'm glad to be here tonight. And thank you for everyone who is tuned in with us live and is going to see the replay. We welcome you to come in, share this with somebody you love. So that's a great question. And I get asked that question a lot. The difference between mental health and mental illness, because I hear a lot of people and they'll say, oh, she has mental health. Okay. Well, I know what they mean when they say it, but we all have mental health. Mental health is just where we are, your psychological ability, where we are in our psychological being. That's overall, that's a blanket description for mental health,
Right.
as opposed to mental illness is typically a diagnosable condition, if you will. It's when you have mental illness, it is something that begins to impair how you function psychologically. So that's the basic answer for between the differences between mental health and mental illness.
I love it. I love it. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
It's like the difference between being stressed out. Like we're in a very stressful climate and just in the world right now. And so it's the difference between being in stressful environments and doing things that you can change the vibration, the energy, your attachment to the stress versus like Dr. Stevens said, having a diagnosable disorder where you don't have that kind of leisure sometimes to be able to change at will, the situation, the climate, the vibrational connection to the environment. So I always joke in the center and say that, we have some conditions within the community that we just have not diagnosed, and we call them hot messes.
Yep.
We call them, is ratchet behavior. And sometimes it's a mental health thing where I just hit my limit, right? Or I'm just sort of repeating what I saw. But then there's times when I say, if you were sane, would you do that? Would that be the decision that you made? Sometimes people they've just kind of gone over the limit of something that they can change at will and need a diagnosis.
That's good.
That's excellent. I love that.
That's good.
Because sometimes, Dr. Stevens, I'm looking, and thanks for that again, Yolanda. Sometimes I'm looking at, when you have the newscast, and they're talking about all these different stories, how someone just went off and just maybe started shooting somebody or whatever, or some kind of a, traumatic event. I always tell people somebody sane is not going to do that. You know what I mean? It's something something was triggered, possibly,
Right.
and you said it best there, Yolanda, and I think that we kind of need to take a look at it. Now, I'm not saying in the sense, because I know some people are like, yeah, every time something happens, they always say, well, they had a mental breakdown or something like that. And they don't, in other words, they're saying they don't like when people like put that label on.
Right.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Or use it as an excuse, they think.
right. That's true. And so, yeah, we definitely have to be careful, in that respect, and not just constantly just put the same label on something. But a lot of times they had that breakdown, like Yolanda was talking about, and they were at their last, or the last straw, or so to speak. And if something like that had been caught earlier, what could have happened? You know what I mean?
In the center, oftentimes, like, we have coaches and we have therapists. And sometimes a coach will come across somebody who's not coachable. They really need the doctor, the therapist. So, people are at different breaking points or different places in their lives that have evolved from what was normal for them to something that they need help for, or help with.
Well, I like to put something out, for everyone, to get everyone's take on it. Annette, you mentioned that, based on what Yolanda said, that sometimes people don't like to be labeled. So I'm just going to throw out, a theoretical question here. Is there anything wrong with being labeled when we really think about it?
I think
just
that
want to give you my take on it. Like,
I
is
think
there anything wrong with that?
it depends on who you're talking to when you're saying label, because people come from different walks and aspects of life where they can accept certain things, and it depends on where they're coming from, where they've been labeled. Some people may have been labeled stupid all their life, and then when they get to a certain age, it's a different label. So they don't like to be labeled. But I also want to go back to when Annette asked about the difference between mental health and mental illness. I feel as though the mental health is the umbrella. Illness is the illness of the health. That's the way that I look at it. It's the illness of the health, because there's so many different health problems that we have. It's the illness of the health, and that's the mental part of any one of our illnesses. I suffer from asthma, but there's a mental part of that asthma that triggers other things. So we're triggered by so many different things that's a mental part, because I have to mentally deal with my asthma at that point in time. If I'm having an attack and say EMT is there and I can't breathe, I'm going after him to move away from me because I can't breathe. Somebody else looking on it will say, that's mental health. It's not, I can't breathe. And I may respond in a way that somebody else may be looking at it saying, oh, and she deals with this. That's a mental health thing. But I think that it's a case by case. You have to get to know your client in order to understand whether they should be diagnosed. I don't want to say label. I think that we should move away from that, because a label is a jar of mayonnaise. It is ketchup. Those are labels. I would not want to label somebody by calling them that. I would say this is a diagnosis that we are believing that you may be on that track of. Just like we say children have different spectrums. So I would say it's the same thing. It's different spectrums of illnesses. I would like to stay away from mental health too, because something can always, everything that we have is going to lead to something. Like everything leads to cancer, whether people want to believe it or not. And it's going to be a mental health that it leads to, because if a person has cancer, there's some mental health that's going to go on with them, because it's devastating. It's going to trigger other things. So I think we should stay away from labels, and I think that it should be a case-by-case basis with the client, because you get to know your client. You know whether you can say certain things to that client for that client to understand it. You're not going to want to label a 17-year-old with depression, because the 17-year-old is going to react in a certain way. But if you relabel If you label or give the diagnosis to a person that's 50 years old and say they have depression, they're going to look at it totally different. So I think that it's a case-by-case basis, and you need to get to know your client in order for you to give them the proper diagnosis, because that label itself can be a trigger. One, because in their family may be a history of, well, my uncle was labeled that, or my aunt was labeled that. I'm nothing like that. So I think that we need to be careful, because those could be triggers in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to chime in on a little bit, ladies, if that's all right. As a coach and that did a lot of studying of just how the mind works, I think that over time we have identified different types of mental illnesses, and those labels of mental illness change as we become more evolved and become more aware of that specific type of mental illness. Because we'll use in the 80s, when someone you will use a term when they weren't learning correctly, that they were slow. Now you have different forms of a breakdown of a term that we would have used in the 80s. I quotate that, of slow, as in it could be that they have ADHD. They have these type of symptoms. And I think that when I hear the term mental illness, I think of it more so that it is a evolution of our thought processes. And as we think and learn more about the mind, because that's what it really is, how our mind actually deals with situations and how it actually deals with stimuli. That's what all mental illness really is understanding that. And as we understand more about it, it allows individuals to not feel labeled, but feel understood. And I think that that's the difference in what's going on in our society today, that we're understanding more about what is actually going on with a human brain and how things are triggering it in different ways. That was my only take. I wanted to toss that in.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I love it.
It's well, I would like to say that concerning labels, diagnosis, that I think that in and of itself is a whole different system. I don't think that people who are dealing with trauma, drama, and things like that understand that the environment that we live in is not our identities. I think I kind of can relate with what Arthur Blaque was saying, because I mean, if someone, a 6-year-old, sees her pet in an accident and the pet, hadn't died, but she's got a pet, she saw the accident, now the pet passes away. And now that child is traumatized by that. They're not having a mental illness thing. However, from then on, they have a way of seeing that, I let my pet die. Nobody helped it. I have some feelings that I got to associate with, which has nothing to do with who that young child is. Yeah. So I think the stigma for me to start talking about mental health or mental illness is what has happened to us does not identify who we are. So we're trying to identify the circumstances surrounding what happens in a person's life. And then they have to, like I heard earlier, they begin to say, okay, I have to own that because, I'm quick tempered. So now I've got some kind of fuse that's messed up. I got some short marbles in my head, or something ain't right, because they're always telling me this, but that's not you. And so it takes a therapist sometimes, but it also takes a person who can see that person and say, listen, we're going to have lifing, but life doesn't define me just because I have meltdowns. And once the person can see that you see them, not what happened to you, you're not this, you're not ill because you don't know how to process what happened. So I'm encouraging our listeners tonight, as we're going through this session, no matter what's going on in your life from a mental perspective, And whatever you heard and how you think you ought to act or how you shouldn't act, that has nothing to do with making sure you get with someone who can help you see you, aside from how you respond to what's going on in your life. And then they can help. They can help bring that into a perspective. That's what I want to say.
I love it. You ladies are
I
y'all killing
love
it
that.
tonight.
Love
Yes.
that, Bobbie.
Listen, I wanted to add to that, because Dr. Stevens asked about labels. I wonder, not really wonder, but my thinking is that when you talk about labels, and many of you have already said it's a stigma, right? And so then with that stigma, it seems that, especially in our community, we probably don't want to seek help or even admit what is really happening with us because of those labels. You know what I mean? So it's almost like, you have a label of whatever. I'm not going to just call out name, but we like the C word, we always say that. And, people automatically think that somebody is that way. They're not necessarily going to seek out the help that they need because they're like, okay, well, they just think that I'm this way anyway. You know what I mean? I think it will kind of hinder people getting the help that they need when you kind of, depending upon the label, because I think Arthur Diamond, started talking about that. Depends upon what label and, what context you're putting it in. Sometimes people kind of take that and they're like, okay, well, I'm doomed, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because they've been labeled like that all their life, and that stigma that comes along with it. It's just my thoughts with the labeling question.
I think that's excellent. And the thing is, when it comes to talking about mental health and wellness, education is vitally important. And the reason why education is so vitally important, and when I talk about education, I don't necessarily mean structured education,
Right.
like you're going to college for a degree, then what have you, but talking to other people, getting as much knowledge as you can, because the amount of knowledge that we have also affects the way that we talk about mental health and mental illnesses. And so in the field, we are taught to help people to label their feelings. I don't particularly ascribe to that myself. I prefer to say to help people to be able to identify what they are feeling, because that's actually what it means when we say label. It is to help an individual to be able to identify at least what it is that they're going through, what they are feeling, so that the person that is working with you, whether it be a coach, an advocate, a therapist, that they're able to guide you. Just like when you go to the doctor, you start out, the doctor doesn't necessarily know what's wrong with you. He's going to ask you, so how have you been feeling? Tell me some things that have been going on with you. So what he is doing is he's trying to get you to help identify what your symptoms look like, so that he is able to help guide you along. And someone said it here, and I'd like to throw that out there while we're at this point of the discussion, because this is real important. And a part of why we're here tonight, I heard somebody say, well, that's why, you might need a therapist. And listen, I'm not trying to not have a job anymore, right? Certainly, I want to say that. But in conjunction with having a trained professional, perhaps, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a mentor, an advocate, a coach, what we need overall, what every person needs, is a community, which is why we're here tonight. We need a community. People heal best when they are surrounded by a community. Within that community, there may be a trained professional, but there may also be a family member. There may be a place if you have a place you worship, a place like that. So our communities that we have need to be diversified. We call that also integrated health. And Yolanda is very good about that because earlier I was telling everybody that Yolanda is the proprietor of the Kindred Healing Center in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
There she has, I gave a number, but I wasn't quite sure how many practitioners she has. But the whole concept there at Kindred is that there are several practitioners who have different modalities. So when you walk in that one building, you are surrounded by a community of practitioners to help you in the various areas of your life where you are having some issues. And we need to mimic that same principle in our communities where there's just not one person, because I as a therapist, I can tell you that when I meet with a person, Annette, I'm going to refer them. I'm going to refer them to a Black Diamond or to Yolanda Center or to Bobbie or to Rachel, because as a therapist, there's only one aspect of their life or mental health that I'm helping them with. And so I would like to really see us think, and that's why we say bringing wellness to the community, that we make the mental health journey one that a community journey, because what affects one person, whether that's one person in your family or one person in your community, overall, that person's mental health journey is going to affect us as an overall community.
That's right.
I love that.
Too,
Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that I find a little bit disturbing is I appreciate Dr. Carolyn for saying the community, but it goes a little bit beyond just the community of professions that's with the psychiatrists, therapists, coaches, and whatnot. You have some professions that are trained in what their profession is, but they're not trained in mental health. And when they come across someone in mental health, they don't know how to deal with it. And it becomes a problem for us. And I don't want to pick on a particular profession, but I believe we all know there are certain professions that interact with them when there are emergency calls that are called. And when they get to the scene, I'll say, that it becomes chaotic because they don't understand and they weren't trained for that. They were trained for what their profession is trained for. You have some who are even afraid to deal with mental health because they don't know how to. And then I want to go back a little bit by the labels. I've worked with children who were labeled ADHD, and I've come across that many of them have been labeled and they were misdiagnosed because the school systems made the assumption that just say an 8-year-old African-American boy has ADHD because of the behaviors that he's displaying. The school is not educated enough to see that that same 8-year-old boy does not actually have ADHD. He has the symptoms of a child that was born as a substance-exposed newborn, and they have the same type of symptoms. But because the school system doesn't understand that or don't know anything about it or never even heard of it, they instantly say ADHD. Look at those symptoms. A lot of them are the same, and they can be treated differently in the school. And then the mental health or the doctors or physicians can help on a different label. But those are other professions that need to be trained, and they're not. And I'm going to pat myself on the back because I'm also a social worker. A social worker wears many hats. We police the matter every day. We make sure that those children go to doctor's appointments. We put out fires every day. So a lot of professions can't do what we do. But we go in there and we do all of that. We're the mothers, we're the fathers, we do a lot of that. So we wear a lot of those hats, but a lot of those professions can't wear the hats that we wear.
Right.
So it needs to go a little bit broader than what they have, which is their regular basic training that's required by the organization that they are from. They have to start going outside of the box and intertwining with other professions to be able to understand so we can work together, because then that becomes a community.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would like to just expound a little bit on Black Diamond. I really appreciate the social workers who actually come into schools and who actually intermingle with children, the teachers, and all the facilitators. I think that this is my only add to that, is that we do speak a lot about people getting the education to be able to handle situations accordingly, and to know when to actually, as Dr. Stevens said, pass that person on to someone who can help them in their particular arena. But I think that the piece that we're missing is the when and the how. And when to know, and how to make that decision of when to pass them over to someone else. And I think that that's the small piece that makes a major impact on an individual's life, as being labeled, as like Diamond was stating, being labeled. And I just used ADHD. As a kid, I want to just speak a little bit. As a kid, I spent 90% of my time from first grade to seventh grade in the library, because I had I wouldn't sit still.
Okay.
Now, over a period of time, it wasn't ADHD. I had traumatic things that happened in my life, and no one ever asked the right questions. And as an adult, I can now express that a lot differently, that it was not just a misdiagnosis, it was just a lack of education by an individual who felt that they were capable to give a diagnosis. It took me 17 years to figure out what was really going on, and for me to actually identify and rectify a problem because of a label, a misdiagnosis, a lack thereof of support. But I want to make sure that as we talk about these things, that we make sure that we come with a solution of what to do and how, when and how. So someone knows what to do, and it starts passing that information on. Because as I said, as a child who went through many changes in the school system and through my life, just because of the fact of people not being very aware of what my issue really was.
Yeah.
And if I could piggyback off of that, one of the things that I really love that's going on today that speaks to what Rachel was saying is trauma-informed communities. A movement to really give some tools to the different professions within our community, and to give some tools to the parents, to the people leading the household, the people in the school system, the criminal justice system, the wellness system alike, to give some basic fundamental tools to say, if you see this, if it looks like this, if it sounds like this, it's probably workable this way. But if you see it going in a different direction, here are some ways to get help for that. Kind of laying out a roadmap for the community to be able to address. Now, I just happened to be blessed I wrote a book about my journey of overcoming trauma. And that book landed me in the White House, working under the Obama administration on the initiative on trauma with ACEs, which is now known as the Trauma-Informed Communities. And it amazed me how we could see the trajectory of a child, like how Rachel was just describing. If somebody was to ask that child the right set of questions, it could kind of help the trajectory of what direction you put that child in. And it didn't necessarily have to come from the therapist, those questions, right? Those fundamental questions could have came from the pediatrician. It could have came from the school counselor. It could have came from the social worker. It could have came from, different avenues, because across the board in the community, there's been some training where we all at least have fundamental information on how to identify the what and the route to the where, you know what I'm saying, and who to ask for when you get there. So, I just wanted to say that I'm not sure. I know that trauma-informed communities is something that's talked about. I'm not sure how prevalent it is across the board in our communities, but I will say they got some awesome tools there to be able to set people in motion in the right direction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love this. Rachel, thank you for sharing that. Thanks for that comment, those comments, Yolanda. Because you never really know. I always say you don't really know what an individual is going through or has gone through unless or if they share it with you, right? So what you were saying, you talked about the when and the how. I was trying to take my little notes, the when and the how. I love that, to even get to the point of getting the help we need, right? But I'm always big, and I think the first thing we have to tackle, and we've said it here tonight, I'm big on owning where you are. So, owning your feelings, owning what you're dealing with or going through. We so easily, and I've seen, of course, in our Black community, we have pushed it under the rug. No, I'm good. That I'm not bothered by that. What do you mean? We don't really address it. So we have to address it. We first have to own where we are before we can address it. And I think, unfortunately, like the things that you went through, Rachel, if, somebody had asked the right questions, I totally agree with that.
Yes.
Then you would have gotten the help you need earlier or sooner. I mean, I still believe, I know God, his timing is everything, right? But, even
I learned a lot along the way. I just say that, Miss Annette. I learned a lot along the way. I mean, but just as you were saying, it's the story. Yeah. It allowed me to bring things out of me and have conversations about those things and be very open with the challenges that I had. And and as a 49-year-old adult, I can actually look back on it and say, this is what we really would need in a school. This is what I really would want to see in a counselor's hand in a school, because if they had that little bit of knowledge, they could help so many children. And actually having those resources, because a lot of because I mean, I coach on leadership and development, on being able to better your finances, and a lot of the reason why your finances are not in order is because there's a lot of things that are going on in your mental. And those are things that you need to get over to be able to step into the person that you need to be. So it's really having those key pieces in the school system, and those key people. I mean, we have to be transparent here. Teachers are already overwhelmed with just teaching kids how to do ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Let's just start with that. They're already overwhelmed with those things. But I think that in our community, the biggest thing is that those resources are available, but only scarcely available. And that person that is available is overwhelmed with the cases that are coming their way. So it's how do we get the people in our community? Because even if our community is speaking about how they're feeling or about what's going on with their child and talking about the misdiagnosis, because right now I'm working with a couple of schools that I hear a lot of parents will say, well, they diagnosed my kid with this, now they're in this kind of program, but that's not the symptoms I'm seeing. After looking on the internet, I'm just quoting that, guys. After looking on the internet, it doesn't match what they said my child has. But it's how do we get those things into our communities in a way where someone actually knows those resources exist? Because if you can only do what you only can how do I say it? You only know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know.
That's true. Yeah, we have to find some resolves for sure.
And we see it all the time. People being misdiagnosed, and then I do like what you said, and I'd like to piggyback on that. You said that people taking ownership, or I would phrase it, being able to So for those that are listening, when we hear that term, to take ownership, we're not saying that you have to be able to say, well, I have ODD, or I have you don't have to be, you don't, if you don't know any kind of a clinical term, that's fine. That's not what we're saying. But what we
Right.
are saying is that, I'm not okay. Just that simple. But
Mhm.
I want to spread that out to give us something to think about here. As a diaspora, we as a diaspora, we've been labeled.
Mhm.
That's part of the issue right there, right? As a whole African diaspora, we have already been labeled, right? So I'd like to say to this discussion tonight, and couple it along with what Annette said, as a diaspora, we need to take some ownership, or we need to identify that as a collective, that there's some problems. And then you went on further to say, and that what we see sometimes in individuals is we tend to brush things under the rug, sweep it under the rug, or not talk about it. But that is cultural behavior because
Yep.
of what we were taught. Okay, there was an ideology or a pathology that was built in and then passed down that taught us that, and I think everybody here on this panel if I started the sentence, everybody's going to be able to say it. All of us have heard our mama or big mama or grandmama say, what goes on in this house, what
Stays in this
stays
house.
in this house, right? Okay, that is cultural.
Yep.
But I think there's a
You better
cultural
not go and talk about and tell nobody about what's going. So culturally, we have adapted that language and that pathology, and it has passed down. Thank God. I will say that what we are seeing emerging now is that people are saying, you know what, that's not really healthy. That has been toxic, because now
Yeah.
year olds who are saying that's how I was taught, but it wasn't working for me. So I just kind of wanted to broaden that horizon a little bit and bring it to us as a diaspora, that we need to take some ownership as a whole community and be able to identify some of our own cultural struggles that we are having, and how as a community, how we have responded to some of the disparities that happened in our community. Because when we talk about mental health, we're talking about how do people mentally respond to things or disparities or things that have happened. Like when Bobbie talked about somebody dying, we all going to respond to that, but how you respond to it depends upon where you are in your own mental health journey. Okay, and so that's why a trauma informed care is vitally important, because we all deal with trauma in different ways. We all respond to trauma. The trauma itself doesn't mean you have a mental health issue. It is how
Mhm.
you respond to trauma. And again, what I said, as a whole diaspora, we have been traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Let me read this comment from Shamikia, I believe. Thanks for joining us.
That is
She said,
that's my therapist sister there. Yeah.
oh, okay. Well, wonderful. We appreciate you for joining us on tonight. Her comment here, trauma-informed CBT can be effective. However, it doesn't work for every client that have experienced trauma, especially if the client has been through multiple therapists and modalities. Thank you for that. And I think I saw, oh, she did say earlier that she works with you on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and that you're a dynamic team. Thank you for that comment,
Yes.
Shamikia. And I think that Breaking the Silence podcast is with us. Thanks for coming in on this evening. Feel free to throw your comments or any questions you may have for us on tonight. If you're just not joining us, we'll be ending shortly on this first segment. We'll be with you for the next 3 Wednesdays talking about Be Well mental health sessions. And tonight we kind of got stuck on talking about mental health and the difference between mental health and mental illness. And we knew that was going to happen because when you take a subject like this, it's so many, dynamics to me, so many levels, and one thing will kind of pop off with another thing. But we want to make sure that this subject is addressed, talked about, finding solutions, as Coach Rachel says. This is what we have to do. I wanted to say this real quick, and I'm going to open it up. I don't know if Yolanda started off and Coach Gary tagged on with it, but you all made me think about when you mentioned about, because you talked about communities, right? Dr. Stevens talked about communities. And the first thing that came to my mind when you're saying that the different communities need to understand, how to deal with it. I was thinking about this, I believe she was a CBS correspondent or ABC correspondent, whichever. It was a young lady, I cannot think of her name. Watch, I'll probably find it once we end. But unfortunately, she was in the public eye. She's on, daily basis on the TV and everything. But she had a mental breakdown. And she took about a year, I think, away, from being on TV. She had a mental breakdown. Let me tell you what happened. She ended up finding out that she was pregnant. She didn't know. She was having twins. And it was all overwhelming for her, not only the pregnancy, but other things she was going through. And she literally was walking with a friend of hers one day. She said, something doesn't feel right. And the friend was like, what do you mean? And she's like, mentally, something's not right. And that goes to the point of we have to know our bodies, right? We have to understand, mentally and physically what we're dealing with. And she ended up going to the emergency room and they checked her out and everything. That's when she found out she was pregnant. Well, she kept saying something's not right mentally. They sent her home. She literally had a breakdown at home. And I think she went on live on one of these social media platforms. And a friend of hers saw what was happening. She was just like kind of talking out of her head, right? A friend saw that she was live, ran over to her place to try and, get her and to get the help. The police had already been called by other neighbors. The police did not know how to handle her situation. They put her in handcuffs, took her off to jail, and mentally that was not what she needed, right? And so you talk about the different professions and stuff, and not knowing, law enforcement not knowing how to handle situation when somebody's having a mental breakdown. That has to be, and I know they say, well, we have our training and this, sometimes that training don't come out when it needs to come out.
Right. That's right.
And so that you all made me think of that when you talk about the different, when you talk about mental illness, mental health, and the challenges. So when you talk about the when and the how, to get to the solutions, they need to understand how to handle, situations like that. You can just throw everybody into the same pot.
That's right.
That ain't gonna work.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there are some entities that we can hold accountable.
That is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Law enforcement does need to have some training. But in addition to that particular, just like we call it DFACS here, or some things call it DSS, but law enforcement for sure. But in addition to some mental health training, they're also, because as a therapist, I'm required to get this training. They also need to be trained in being culturally cognizant as well. As we go forward, those two things need to work together, because you need to understand not only some aspects of mental health, but you need to understand it from the perspective of the communities that you are serving in. And that I believe that presents a lot of problem in itself when you don't have that kind of cultural awareness.
I think that it goes a little bit higher than where we're at right now. we're blaming, from what I feel, and this is my personal opinion, we're sitting here talking about communities and each other, this profession, that profession. Let's call it what it really is. Politics is more so involved in this than anything else. They're more so concerned about the power than more of the people. They could care less. It's all about money with them and where they're shifting money for this and where they're shifting money for that. You know, organizations, and we're talking about responsibility. I could sit here and talk about so many different things when it comes to mental health. And I'm going to get a little bit personal. I have children who had mental health issues, and I went to professionals for help, and they did nothing but turn it on me.
Wow.
And I worked in the field, and I trained in that field, and they did nothing but to turn it on me because they did not know how to handle it. And then when you go up the levels, they do the same thing. Nobody wants to take responsibility. And then when you mentioned earlier about what happens in your house stays in the house, well, I wrote a book, In My Mother's House. And believe me, it was problems when I said what was in my mother's house. People are not ready yet. They have not evolved yet, and they have not been taught yet. They have been taught more so to work against each other than to work with each other. We're sitting here, all of us, those professionals, we are psychiatrists, therapists, coaches, and all. But we should not be the ones that's taking the blame for what's going on or even accepting that. Because we've reached out, and I know we have, we reached out to those other organizations and to what people may say the higher powers, let's call it real, to politics. And they're sweeping it under the rug. You can go into every state and talk about everybody that's dealing with mental health. And each one of us can come back and say just about the same thing because it's politics that's dealing with all of this. It's not us. We're ready to do the work, but they're not ready to accept it yet. Because as long as there's mental health and nobody's doing anything about it, as long as they're catching a check.
I was just about to say, there's a check.
It's a check.
I would like to say that I heard the mention of a counselor tonight from when Annette spoke, and also Dr. Carolyn. I heard you all talk about a counselor that I have personally in my lifetime was able to be counseled by. And that counselor taught me that I am not, again, this environment I live in. I am not identified by things that happen to me. I'm not identified by other people. Mm-hmm. And this counselor was the one that also counseled my mother, who had mental, I'm going to call them mental traumas that in the Black culture was also just what everybody said. You just don't talk about it. And if you do, you better not tell the truth. But my mother was also counseled by this same person who said that I am the one that made you. There is not another person who is going to go into you mentally and tell you how to be you. And so she didn't get this wonderful session that we're having on how to own anything, how to wait for somebody right to come into your life, or how you should reach out if you're an adult or a child. Mm-hmm. But this counselor here is on such a high level that if you never know what agency, what race, what political stance, Democrat or Republic, this counselor says, I am above all of that, and I know you. So it doesn't get to be about, let me teach you how to respond or how to come out of your traumas. Let me deal with who you are. Once you know who you are, no matter your age, once you know who you are, then there's a difference in what's happening to you and how you're responding to it. And that was the name of God. It has nothing to do with faith. You don't have to believe, because there are children that are being rescued from sex trafficking because of that same counselor named God, because he can take another child who can identify the mental prison that other child is in, and he be in the midst of it and heal them. And I love that we have this opportunity to bring out sources of help. I also wrote a book about Walking on Streets of Gold, which was the voice of an overcomer, a woman who grew up in slavery. Not, I know a little bit, but she was actually in it. No, you didn't have a voice because she was also a Black woman in poverty. So you had no right, even in your home with a Black man, you were substandard.
Wow.
You had to choose between being quiet to save your children's life and take the abuse, or stand up and risk you and the children being killed. So agencies weren't around in that time, but God was always around.
That's
We're
good.
concerned tonight, I think, in this setting, that we do open up avenues of wisdom and knowledge and learning, that we're in a role where, like I said before, there are people who do need a therapist because sometimes they just need that neutral person where they can feel like it's okay to say it. They just need to have a safe place to say it. And I want to tell you something. Prayer is always going to be a place that's safe for you to say anything and everything. You are not what happened to you. You are not what happened to you. And one last time, you are not what happened to you.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's good. That's
Amen.
good.
Beautifully put.
Wow, this has been tremendous. We're about at an hour now. You ladies, I want to thank you. I love the transparency. I love the, we can talk. We may not agree with everything, but we can understand. We can talk about it and be able to understand. So I understood each and every one of you all tonight, and I appreciate it. Guys, we will be back next Wednesday and the following Wednesday and the following Wednesday. So 3 more Wednesdays we'll be with you. We're going to have this conversation. Hopefully everyone will be able to continue on with it. We are having this month of October. Dr. Stevens and I talked and having, this time to be able to again address be well mental health conversations. Which I believe is not only it helps us, yeah, and I believe it will help others as well. And as we talk through things, and because sometimes we're talking about things that people are thinking about that they may not want to say, what have you, or maybe they don't know how to say it or how to address it. And so when we sit, I sit here with my queen sisters and we sit here and we talk about things. I think that is really going to be a tremendous help, in God's community to be able to help others. So, does anybody want to give us like a kind of wrap up on tonight? Dr. Stevens, I'll throw it in your court. Why don't you wrap us up with something to encourage us to come back on next week?
Yes.
Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, discussion, if you will. And I knew that it would be because I know a little bit about each of you. And at some level, each of us have had opportunities to talk about these various subjects. And I thought that it would be most profound to gather us together as a community to share our different perspectives, our various experiences, so that we are also able to articulate some solutions. I believe that coming up with some solutions or some answers can come from each of us as we put them together. We've identified we want to come away from stereotypically labeling people and encourage identifying where you are. Annette brought forth a point about taking ownership. And for those of you that are listening, what we're saying tonight is that if need be, you can simply put that in a simple sentence, I'm not okay. Sharing that with someone and saying, I'm not okay. Love what Bobbie said. But if you're not okay, it doesn't have anything to do with you as a whole person. God has created you as a whole and beautiful person. And as whole and beautiful people, we've all experienced some things in life. We've been through some traumatic experiences in life that will affect our mental health. But it doesn't mean that you can't be okay. We talked about everybody taking accountability when we listened to Black Diamond. And all of us, various agencies, the political arena, the fund where funding comes from, that we all take accountability to say that yes, we can all do better, and or we have not done anything at all. I'd like to add to that. When we talk about, quote, we're going to call the powers that be, that may never take accountability. However, as a collective, as a community, then we certainly can come together. What can we do? Where can we start? We can start where we're starting from tonight. We can start to have these conversations. We can start to talk about some answers. We can start to talk about what resources are out there. We can start to talk about what are some people doing so that they can become some solutions, like at Kindred Wellness Center, like with Coach Bobbie and Wellness for You, like with Annette being a certified mental health advocate, like Dr. Carolyn Stevens being a clinical therapist and a Christian therapist, like Black Diamond being a trauma-informed therapist. So we can start to be able to point people in the direction that they choose so that you can go to. But overall, what we're saying is that you're not alone. You are not alone. And we're here tonight to tell you that, yes, by all means, we want you to be rich. If you want to be, then be famous. Go out there and be great. But most of all, our main message is that we're saying tonight is we want you, yes, sister, listening, yes, brother, listening, yes, mom, yes, dad, we want you to be well. There is hope for our community, and we are starting here by having the conversation. Thank you so much, Annette, for having us here. Can't wait till next Wednesday. We'll be here all October, sending lots of light and love to each of my beautiful panelists and sisters. And listen, share this with a friend tonight. Sit down and listen to it tonight. And if you're not well, just know it's okay to not be okay, but you can be well, and we want you to be well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I picked the right person more to end us on tonight. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. And I love the title that she gave, Be Well. Be well. So we don't want to leave you hanging. We're going to try, find some solutions and some resolve during these segments. So thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you again for your time on tonight. I want to hold to my hour. I told you guys before we even started, so I don't want to bore your patience, but I want you to be able to come back. And those of you that are watching, again, those that have shared, that are tagged into this live feed, we thank you so much for joining us on tonight. And make sure you come back on next week, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. And remember, mental health is not a destination. It's about how you drive, not where you're going. All right. Always keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. All right. We're going to get out of here. Again, we'll see you guys next week. Make sure that you stay tuned to the promos as we're pushing this out. Dr. Stevens is pushing it out. I'm also as well, and different ones are sharing it. So we again appreciate it. And until next time, get caught.
Get caught in a net with